On behalf of the Rabbi Price Foundation, I would like to thank all those who have joined us for this commemorative lecture in memory of HaGaon Rav Avraham Aharon Price, Yahrtzeit Livracha. It has been 28 years since the passing of Rabbi Price, and he continues to inspire us over all that time through the legacy of his rabbinic commentary and his generous support of Torah education. It is our privilege to welcome HaGaon Rav Asher Weiss to present this shiur on the topic of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your friend or your neighbor as yourself. In Rabbi Price's third volume of commentary on the Smug, he concludes that it is the opinion of both the Smug and the Rambam that we must assist even those in their time of need, even those who commit sins, and that there can be no personal hatred, even for sinners, and any public displeasure is allowed only for the purpose of influencing others towards repentance. It is therefore appropriate that HaRav Asher Weiss, Rabban Shel Yisrael, should discuss the mitzvah which involves loving fellow Jews. Jews from all walks of life and from different levels of observance have chosen to turn to HaRav Weiss for his guidance and inspiration, and he is a man who treats all Jews with love and respect. I'd just like to mention that if you have questions, you can put them in writing in the chat, and we hope to have a few minutes for questions and answers at the end of the shiur. So with that, I would ask Rav Weiss if he would commence his shiur.
So shalom aleichem to all of you. It's a privilege and a zchus once again to participate in this event, Le'ilui Nishmos, one of the great Gedolim of North America, Rav Avraham Aharon Price. I do not recall, but I had this privilege, I think a year or 2 years ago. I do not recall when it was. You know, I've been giving so many shurim in recent years. I remember what I talk about, but I could no longer remember where and when. But we had a Zoom shiur in the memory of Rabbi Price. He was a paragon, a great leader, and a founder of Torah institutions in Toronto. And as we just heard, was a man of immense stature, a great teacher of Torah, and the author of a fundamental classical work on the Smag, the Mishnas Abraham. The Torah we learn today should be Lilu Nishmosi, and we should all be inspired. And there is no more appropriate time to deal and discuss and understand the mitzvah of Yahrtzeit than in the midst of Yemei Asfira, because these are days that originally should have been days of joy. The Ramban al Torah says the 49 days between Pesach and Atzeres are in a way similar to the 7 days between Sukkot and Atzeres. The essence of Chol HaMoed, but the days were transformed, Meyam Tev LaEvel, U'Ma'or Gadol LaAfela. 24,000 scars, Talmidei Rebbe Akiva perished in a short period by Pesach Atzeres, Shelo Nahagu Kavod Zeh B'Zeh. So there's no more appropriate time to discuss this mitzvah than in the midst of the Sfira days. Many times in the past, I explained, many wonder why such a terrible oynish, such a horrific punishment. That's not a chiyuv mises based, and it's not a chiyuv koros. 24,000 Talmidim perished. Terrible death by strangulation, by suffocation. askel, which is a pulmonary disease. And many times I explained they bear responsibility because they were Talmidei Rebbe Kiva. And to be the Talmud of a giant is not only a privilege, it's a responsibility. Rebbe Kiva is the one that teaches us in Yerushalmi Nedorim Daf Lamed Amud Beis. V'yohavta l'reacho kamocha zekal boru b'Torah. And min hashamayim, it is as if those Talmidim were asked, you claim to be Talmidim of Rebbe Kiva and you learn nothing from his teaching, from his ways. So the first question I want to discuss, v'yohavta l'reacho kamocha, halacha or musar? We know that Yiddishkeit is based on two pillars. Halacha is not the entire story. Halacha is essential, but there's something more than halacha, and that is ethics and musar. Yes, there are many mesechtes in Shas that deal with halacha, but there's one that deals with ethical values and morals, not with halachic ruling. And that is Masechet Weiss. So where does v'yohavta l'reacho kamocha belong? On one hand, it's a mitzvah to say, but in essence, is it about your feelings or about your deeds and actions? How does it form the mitzvah of v'yohavta l'reacho kamocha? Well, love is an emotion. Obviously, in mikra yotzei midei pshuto, you must love your fellow Jew. But is love enough? Or does it demand acting out your love with deed and with action? The two most important targumim ala Torah and Pashas Kedoshim have different interpretations on the mitzvah of v'yohavta l'reacho kamocha. I really apologize, but I need to get up from my seat because I think it would be beneficial if I could just read to you the Targum, the lashon of the Targum. So I apologize. I'm just moving out of my seat. I think it'll be just 3 seconds. So a somewhat more than okay, I apologize. It was somewhat more than 3 seconds, and I needed to readjust my screen. So as I mentioned, the two most major Targums have different interpretations. How do we define v'yohavta l'reacho kamocha? The Onkelos writes, v'terachmei l'chavrach kavosech anu Hashem. Just a literal translation. What the Pasuk says in Lashon HaKodesh, the Onkelos says in Aramaic. However, Targum Yonason uses different wording. And in Targum Yonason, he follows in the footsteps of Hillel HaZoken. And I'm just looking for the words. I apologize. I apologize, I don't find the Lashon of the Targum Yonasan, but the Targum Yonasan says, whatever you expect others to do for you, you should do for others. And that is the Rambam's interpretation in Hilchos Ovel, Perek Yud Dalet, Halach Yud Aleph. And I want to read you the Lashon of the Rambam. מצווה ששי של דבריהם לבקר את החולים, לנחם אבלים, לא יציימס ולהכניס הקר לחופוסו, ללוות אורחים, להתעסק בכל צורכי הקבורה, וכן לשמח חוסן וקלה ולסעדם בכל צורכיהם, ואלו הן גמילת חסודים שבגופו, שאין לה שיעור. And then the Rambam goes on and he says, ואף על פי שכל המצוות האלה מדבריהם, הרי הם בכלל ואהבת לרעך כמוך. כל הדברים שאתה רוצה שיעשו עושים לך אחרים, עשה אתה אותם לאחיך בתורה ובמצוות. So the Rambam says, the Yahrtzeit is not only about your feelings and your emotions, it's about your actions and deeds. It is the way you act, react, and interact with your fellow Jews. The Yahrtzeit demands, try to imagine, what would make you happy? How do you want other people to relate to you? And that is the way you are supposed to relate to others. And this Rambam we find in the Smag as well. And it is the interpretation of Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. Does it sound familiar? It should sound familiar because that is the famous story that we find in Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph. A convert that came to Shammai, and he asked Shammai, "Lamdeni kol haTorah kula regalachas." Could you teach me the entirety of Torah while I'm standing on one foot? It's somewhat of a strange request. I don't think this should be taken literally, standing on one foot. I think what the convert wanted to know, is this a very lengthy study? Do I need to spend months, years, a lifetime to understand what the essence of Torah is? Or could you just give it to me briefly in one line? Shammai, so Shammai was standing on the scaffolds. He had a big board, a big piece of wood, a plank, and I just shove him down the steps. In my sichos I wrote, everything is symbolic. There's no coincidence in Chazal. A plank is just a plank, and a board is just a piece of wood. You need 1,000 planks and 100 boards to build a tent, to build a house, to build a building. And that was the remez of Shammai. You're ridiculous. And this is a stupid request. Learning one piece of Torah is just like one brick in an entire building. And then he came to Hillel. Hillel was somewhat more responsive and more embracing. And he gave him a one-liner. Mada Allah sami lachavre chalota avi. What you wouldn't like others to do to you, don't do to others. It's not all. Ve'idach pirusha. All the rest is commentary. Zil kimor. So it is Hillel that gives this idea, this ethical approach. What you wouldn't like others to do to you, don't do to others. But Hillel didn't mention the posuk v'yahavta kamocha. That is a chiddush of Yonasan ben Uziel. But it's so obvious, you can't escape the feeling that we hear the words of Yonasan ben Uziel, but it's the echo of Hillel HaZaken in the background. This comes from somewhere now. Let me just revive your memory. The Gemara in Sukkot HaPavches says that Yonasan ben Uziel was the greatest disciple of Hillel HaZaken. So to me, it is quite obvious. This is the teaching of Hillel. The chiddush of Yonasan ben Uziel is that is the interpretation of the Yahrtzeit kamocha, something we do not find in the words of Hillel HaZaken. Hillel HaZaken just tells the convert, yes, I'll give you one line, and that is the basis of all the others. But to me, it is quite obvious when Rabbi Kiva says, "V'yahavta kamocha" is a klal gadol b'Torah. That fits in so wonderfully with Hillel. This is the fundament. This is the basis. This is the klal gadol b'Torah. All the rest is commentary. I just want to make an additional comment. So, I think V'yahavta kamocha only refers to 50% of Torah, to one half of the package, to the entirety of Ben Adam L'Chaveiro. But V'yahavta kamocha definitely doesn't cover Onech Hashem Elokecha, Lo Yichol Lechem Acherem, V'yahavta es Hashem Elokecha, es Hashem Elokecha Tiro. I think Hillel was referring to the entire realm of Ben Adam L'Chaveiro. So let me just give a brief summary. Hillel HaZaken is the first to demand the ethical principle. The way you act and react and interact with other people should be the same as you would expect others to treat you. You want others to treat you kindly, with love and respect. That is the way you should treat others. Yonasan ben Uziel comes along and says, that is pshat v'yahavta kamocha, and that is the Rambam, Perek Yud Daled of Hilchos Avos. However, there's an interesting question here. Both Yonasan ben Uziel and the Rambam present this idea in a positive connotation. Let's once again mention the words of the Rambam. Kol hadvorim she'atu roitze she'yasu oisam l'cha acherim, asei ato oisan la'achicha. But Hillel presents the same idea in a negative connotation. Mada alachsani, what you hate, don't do to others. So why does Hillel speak in a negative form, while the Rambam and Yonasan ben Uziel express this very same sentiment in the positive way? The Maharsha in Masechet Shabbos asked this question. Now, the Mashur doesn't quote the Rambam, neither does he quote Yonasan ben Uziel and Talmud. He just asks on the story that the Gemara tells. Why doesn't Hillel teach the convert this very same ethical value and idea in the positive? Why in the negative? And the Mashur's answer is very difficult for me to accept. So the Mashur says, because Rabbi Kiva is the one that teaches us, you should put yourself before others. So how could we say, whatever you want, do to others? I come before others. I don't understand in my show. No, I do not come before others. And a good Jew should always put others before himself. It is only regarding pikuach nefesh that we have the halacha chayecha And that is because Chazal teach us, it's not against the law to commit suicide. It's against the law to hurt others. But in Torah, in our Torah, committing suicide equals murder. Because your life is no more yours than another person's life. Your life is not your possession. It is not like your house or your field or your car or anything else you possess. Life is a mission. We're here to serve. We're here to move on and to achieve Chaye Olam Haba. So in Torah, suicide equals murder because your life is not yours. The Radbaz al Rambam Perek Yudches Melches Neder teaches us this fundamental idea, explaining a halacha and dine ra'ayot. And we had a case in Beis Din, and the defendant admits he's right. Yes, he did give me a loan of $10,000, which I did not yet repay. The psak would be his admission is binding, and he cannot retract. That is the law of Eidos Ladin Kamei Eidim Dami. However, b'mishpat ha'plulili, if a person admits, yes, I killed another, I was mechal Shabbos, I was bayalesu erva, and I am chayev misa, we totally ignore his admission. He has no authority to testify that he is chayev misa. Just like he has no authority to testify that another person deserves capital punishment because he is eid echad. Same regarding his own life. He bears no nemonos regarding his life. He does have nemonos regarding his money, his possession, because your life isn't yours. And it is only in this realm that we say, you cannot sacrifice your life. You're not mechuyev to sacrifice your life. Save another. According to most poskim, you're not entitled to do so. Everybody agrees you're not obligated to do so. But that is only when we deal with life. When we deal with chesed, yes, we should put others before ourselves. So I disagree with the Marshal's interpretation. So why did Hillel teach the convert the negative aspect and not the positive one? If it would be up to me, I would give a very simple, practical, balabatisha answer to this question. Hillel was always the merciful, the compassionate, the loving, the forgiving. And Hillel thought maybe it would be too much for this convert to do for others whatever he would like others to do for him. Tofasto merubo loy tofasto. And that is why Hillel, all he demands from that convert is, don't be bad, don't be hurtful, don't be offensive, don't hurt others. Don't do to others what you would not like others to do to you. So let me just make a point. When Hillel said, kamocha, when Hillel said, he clearly told the convert, there is so much more to it. We will have to keep on learning. Idach Pirusha Sil Gemor. So to me, it would be simple. And the next session, Hillel probably told him, what I told you yesterday, don't do to others what you wouldn't like others to do to you. Let's move forward. Do to others whatever you would like others to do for you. So let's just go back to the fundamental chiddush of the Rambam. And we find the same in the Smag. I did not check the Mishnah Sabrom, and I apologize. But the Smag and Mitzvah say that the interpretation is exactly like Hillel in the negative form, not like the Rambam in the positive. So the Smag and the Rambam are two of the greatest Monei Mitzvot. The Smag follows Mamish in Hillel's footsteps. The Rambam follows in the interpretation of Hillel's Talmud, Yonasan ben Uziel. The common denominator that both follow. We have to HaKamocha is not only a moral value, it's not only Musa, it's Alocha. It's not only about your emotions, it's about your deeds as well. The after HaKamocha means that you need to do, you need to act, you need to be helpful. And according to the Rambam we quoted, the after HaKamocha includes a big package. Achnos esorchen, nichum avelem, lesameach chosam v'kala, levoyes ameis. All the mitzvahs that Chazal define as gemilas chasod begufoi, they're all included in the mitzvah of yohavto l'reacho kamocha. Now I want to share a big chiddush with you. So when we learn Rabbi Kiva, we have to go to the Torah. Our feeling is that once again, Rabbi Kiva refers to Musa. Ahavas Lein is fundamental, it's basic, it's important. It's one of the most important values in Musa, in Chassidus. So what I want to share with you is we have to ask a little bit is also an halacha, and I love this. And it affects the entire spectrum of all mitzvahs shebenalim chavei. So we go over to Sanhedrin Daf Pei Daled Amud Beis, which is an amazing sugi. Everybody learns. Nobody realizes what an astonishing chiddush this Gemara is. So the Gemara deals with the question, is a son allowed to perform bloodletting from his father's body? Bloodletting was once very popular. It was considered extremely medically beneficial. I don't think they do that anymore. In days of yore, to us, it would seem so repulsive. But we live in a modern world, which in so many ways is different from the world of yore. You know what bankers are? They use leeches. Person lie down on his stomach with a bare back, and they put leeches on his back, blood suckers. And they used to suck his blood. Those were insects. To me, it would seem, I would vomit just to think about it. And then they devised more mechanical methods of bloodletting. And of course, it's not more considered extremely beneficial to oneself. And the Gemara is mesupik, if a father asks his son to draw his blood for his benefit, is it permitted at all? No. Is it maka of a ve'imoy? Moisyumas. If a son versus father injures his father and draws his father's blood, regarding any other Jew, would be alive. Son to a father, it is one of the most harsh transgressions, chayiv misa. But when drawing your father's blood is not against his will, it's without bad intentions. To the contrary, it's to his benefit. And we do it for himself. Years ago, I was asked an interesting question, and I wrote a tshuva about this. I think it's printed in the Shalos, but I don't even remember which of my tshuvas was already printed and which not. So there was a young girl that trained as a hygienist in a dental office, in a dentist's office. And who would be the first patients? Nobody wants to be a guinea pig. So who would be her first patients? So naturally, her father and mother volunteered. Could you please clean our teeth? You should be able to tell the next patient, oh, I already have experience, hoping they won't ask you how much experience you have. But dad and mom wanted to give their daughter an opportunity to have experience. So they were the first two patients. And this girl turned to me, am I allowed to do this? Because in the process of cleaning one's teeth thoroughly, you always draw blood. So I wrote an interesting tshuva. And the tshuva is based on this Gemara. Ben Shemai Shiyakas Domim La'over. And the Gemara says, yes, he can do it. Why? Rashi explains, if you need treatment, if you need this medical procedure, you would want someone to be forthcoming and do it for you. And therefore, you have the mitzvah to do it for others. And that is why a son is allowed to treat his father and perform a medical procedure on his father's body, even though it requires drawing his blood. So probably Hakozas Dam would be similar to a hygienist cleaning father or mother's mouth. But the Gewaldige Kasha is, what does Maka over the Imoy have to do with V'yahavtu kamocha? V'yahavtu kamocha was the mitzvah say. Maka over the Imoy is a lav and a chiyuv misa. What does one have to do with another? Tamar bechitin v'hoideloi b'sa'oren. My great father was a huge Talmud Chacham. He passed away 6 years ago. I might have told you something about my father in the past. He was a leader, he was a teacher, and I miss him greatly every day. And he loved a good vertical. And I apologize. I speak about my father, I become somewhat emotional. So the question is, what does Maka of the Imoy have to do with V'yahavta l'Lecha kamocha? V'yahavta kamocha is a mitzvah say. Maka of the Imoy is allowed. What does one have to do with the other? So what I learned from this sugya is, V'yahavta l'Lecha kamocha as a fundamental principle is the underlying factor and underlying idea and basis of the entire spectrum of mitzvah sheben adam l'chaveiroi, which includes Maka of it. All the mitzvahs that have to do with the interaction between one person and another, they all belong in the category of mitzvah sheben adam l'chaveiroi. I am aware that the minchas chinuch is mesupah. Maka of Imoy, is it ben adam l'mokom or ben adam l'chaveiroi? Not Maka of Imoy. Kvoid av em. Kabed es alichu b'yamecha. The minchas chinuch is mesupah. Is this ben adam l'chaveiroi, ben adam l'mokom? But in minchas social I wrote my clear opinion. It is ben adam l'chaveiroi. Because the defining factor between Ben Adam l'Chavei and Ben Adam l'Mokim is not the reasoning, it's not the rationale, it's not the Tamei mitzvahs, it is the practicality. All the mitzvahs that deal with the relationship between one human being and another, the interaction between people, they are mitzvahs shebenadam l'chaveiro. And the most fundamental principle in this entire spectrum is v'ahavta kamocha, and therefore the interpretation of v'ahavta kamocha. Going back to the Rambam, and Yonasim and Oziel, call it Vorim Shat Oitz Shias Oisam B'Chol Cherem. I say Ata Oisam LaAchicha. That dictates the entire package, including Makkah of the Bigin. And that is why the Maskon of the Gemara is: if this is what your father wants, if this is what your father needs, and it is not to his detriment, but to his benefit, it is not an Aveda, it's not Makkah of Avimo, it is a mitzvah of the Yahrtzeit. And that is the way I see Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Zeh klal olam b'Torah. Not only in machshava, not only in musa, not only in morals and ethics, but also in halacha psuk. Chuvas Masham Chelik Beis in the Shiur, this an inspiring and remarkable tshuva. The speakers about the greatness of Tu Gedol Yisrael. The Aderes was one of the greatest Iluyim in Lithuania. He was a young Ilui, an upcoming star. Ultimately, he was the father-in-law of Rav Kook. And when he was 50 years old, he was offered the job to be assistant rabbi of Reb Shmuel Salant. Shmuel Salant was more than 90 years old. And they wanted a young, vibrant, dynamic sage to step in after Reb Shmuel Salant will pass away. And they offered the post to the Aderes. Tragically, after 1 year, Yerushalayim passed away before Reb Shmuel Salant. And the older Reb Shmuel Salant was Masped the Aderes, who lived slightly more than a year in Yerushalayim before he tragically passed away at a very young age. So when he was offered the Rabbonos in Yerushalayim, he sends a shayla to the Masham. The Masham was the Gadol Ador, the Rav of Persia. And the Aderes, it was a new experience to him being a Rav. In Lithuania, he wasn't a Rav, he was a Marketsteir, a Mechaves Korn. And he turns to the Masham with the question of HaRav. Is a Rav entitled to have private time for himself? Or must he have an open door? And whenever someone comes with a shayla, he must open his home and open his heart and give him a tshuva. Is he entitled to what the Yekkes would call Schlafstunden, sleeping time from 2 to 4 in the afternoon? Must he go to the door 12 o'clock by night when somebody knocks on the door? Or he is entitled like any other individual, any other human being? You're a doctor, don't need to be on call 24 hours a day. I work in a clinic, I work in the hospital, but don't bother me in the middle of the night or any other profession. And the Marsham writes, a Rav, just like any other person, is entitled to have his own private time, family time. However, he quotes the Medrash, Reb Shimon Kohen Gadol, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol were Harugei Malchus. They were tortured and killed by the Romans, together with some other of the greatest Tanoim, including Rabbi Akiva. And when they sat in the Roman dungeon, they made a cheshvan nefesh. Why is this happening to us? What did we do wrong? And one of them said he remembers once a woman knocked on the door and she had a question in her chasnida, and I didn't respond immediately. Mind-boggling. That is why I am paying the price. HaKodesh Baruch Hu medaktikim chasido kechut hasara. And the Masham calls the Medrash, and the Masham writes, HaRav is entitled to have private time. But I, the Masham testifies upon himself, I never turn a person away. Whenever it would be, a person knocks on the door, I will always respond with a honest body. Obviously, that is what the Adela took upon himself. Now, let me just make a comment. The days of the Masham, there were no emails, no WhatsApps, no cell phones, no telephones. All there was a knock on the door or a letter. It was easier for the Board of Dead than it is today. People call me all day and all night. I try to respond, but Chotosi or Visi, I cannot say that I answer every phone call, but I try to be available because I believe that the Borim should be available. So my Mikorovim say, put away your cell phone. No rabbi of your stature answers cell phone. He has a gabbai, he has a shamish. I believe that a rabbi is a servant, not a master. Like the Gemara says in Hodius, and you need to be available. So I do answer my phones. I cannot say I answer every time the phone rings. But I am available and I try to serve. So that's an amazing story. And the Marsham in his Tshuva quotes the mitzvah of Yahrtzeit. And he says, nobody likes to knock on the door and be turned away. It's not the type of treatment you would enjoy. So never do this to others. And if a person knocks on the door because he needs you, especially for a halachic issue, then you should be available. So we discussed the halachic aspect of Yahrtzeit. I just want to share a short thought with you, which I think is moving and inspiring. We spoke today about the essence of the mitzvah Yahrtzeit. Chassidim Misaper. Chassidish story about the great tzaddik Rav Moshe Leib Misasa, who was a disciple of Reb Shmelka ben Ikrishbod and Rabbi Melech Menizhatz. And he said, the profound essence of Yahrtzeit I learned from an non-Jew. So before we go further in the story, I just want to apologize. Why would a great tzaddik learn from a guy? Should be no wonder at all. If the Gemara in Kedushin says, Ad Heichen Kibud Av, we learn it from a non-Jew, Dama ben Nisima. Makol Malamdai is God. He's a Chochem Haloimet Makol. And the Baal Shem Tov taught his Talmidim. Whatever a person sees, whatever he hears, whatever he experiences, is a Shlocha Totas. And they all come to teach him and to enlighten him. Otherwise, he wouldn't see what he saw, he wouldn't hear what he heard, he wouldn't experience what he experienced. You need to learn from every experience. So as the story goes, the Moshe Leib Sasser says, I was once walking in the street and I overhear a conversation between two people, obviously non-Jews. Mr. A asks Mr. B, do you love me? Mr. B is offended. And he says, how do you dare to ask that question? We've been friends for 20 years. Of course I love you. Mr. A asks, could you tell me what hurts me? Mr. B is taken aback and he says, how would I know? You didn't tell me. Did you ask? Did you ask? Do you really want to know, or you prefer look the other way and not ask, not inquire, and not know? How could you dare to say, I love me if you don't even know what hurts me? Mr. A asked Mr. B. And Moshe Leib Sasser said, it is then that I understood what Yahrtzeit was all about. How do you dare to say you love me if you don't know what hurts me? So V'ahavta kamocha is not only about the way you feel about people, about your feelings and emotions. No, it's about what do you do and how do you act out your love if you say you really love. Are you helpful? Are you comforting? Are you supporting? Are you doing anything that is within your power to do to help ease in others' pain? That is the essence of your Yahrtzeit. Both in the negative form, and both in the positive context. כל הדברים שאת רואה שיעשה עושים לך אחרים, עשה את והוכיח בתורה ובמצוות. That is the essence of your Yahrtzeit. And I always taught my children, since they were little children, every night before one goes to sleep, he needs to ask himself, did I bring a smile on someone's face today? Did I make someone happy today? If the answer is yes, you deserve a good night's sleep. Shnas Yeshorim. If the answer is no, try to be better tomorrow. 24,000 Talmidei Rabbi Akiva perished. Sheminago Kovid Sebesa. And in Koheles Rabbi Perek Zayin, it is not Chazal that tell the story, like in Yevamah Samach Beis. Koheles Rabbi Perek Zayin is Rabbi Akiva telling his story to his later Talmidim, Rabbi Seru Shebedoro. And it is in his words, and he tells his later Talmidim, the giants, Reb Meir bar Anes, Reb Shimon bar Yechoya, Reb Yossi ben Chalaf, Reb Yehuda bar Eloi, Reb Elazar ben Shemua. He tells them, I had 24,000 Talmidim and they all died. Mepnei she'eineihem hoisot tzoro b'toiro zeh b'zeh. Tzoro b'toiro. They didn't argue about money, about covenant, about havli havolim. They argued about Torah and Hashkafa. And they died. And Rabbi Akiva pleased with his later Talmidim. Atem al tihiyu kain. I cannot survive another loss like this one. So please be different. Be embracing, be loving, be respectful to each other. Tinago Kovet Zebesen. We don't have the time, but at Minchas Rosh Sichos in Chelek Yemot, there's an amazing Sicha. The Sefer just came out in English a while ago. Sichos al-Moedim. And I brought sources from the Gemara and the Medrash that the later Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, the 5 giants, according to Koheles, there were 7. Each of them is a paragon of Ahavas Reim, Kvod Chavedim, and Midas Tovos. Here also we should be Zoch to be amongst those Talmidei Chachamim. Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Sholem B'Yodem Shenemar, V'Rav Sholem B'Nayach, Al Tikra B'Nayach Ela B'Nayach. We should all learn to love each other, to respect each other, to help each other. Try to be helpful in times of pain, times of suffering, times of strife. It's a pleasure to be with you, and we do have some time for some questions, please.
Okay, Shlomi Schwartz, I believe you have a question.
Please.
I was just commenting that when you said that there's the limit on Chayecha Kaidim is only on Sholas Nefashos, but you see by tzedakah that you can only give up to 20%, 80% you have to keep for yourself. So same idea.
I do not think it's the same idea, because in Reish Mem Tes, when we learn this halacha, and it is also in the Gemara in Ksubas Daf Nun, it's just out of concern that the wheel of fortune might take a bad turn. It is not about Chayecha Kodmen. It is so logical that a person not only provides for his family and his immediate community, but also prepares for a rainy day. Nobody in that context quotes Chayecha Kodmen. It is a takona, one of the takonas Usha. And the reasoning is, Shelo Yeni B'Yapol Al HaTzibur. It's extremely logical. And I tell this to many people, don't give more than 20%. But no early commentator connects this or quotes the halacha of Chayecha Kodmen regarding this halacha. It's not the same concept.
Elchanan Kurt, you had a question?
The questions do not necessarily be related to the shiur we said. Please.
Could I ask a question? Is Samuel Silverberg again? Can you hear me? No?
I hear you.
Okay. Why did Rabbi Akiva inform the convert the basics of the Torah, a mitzvah shebein adam l'chavero? He seemed to have left out all the mitzvahs shebein adam l'makom.
I think I related to this question in today's shiur. In my understanding, Rabbi Akiva refers only to ben adam l'chavero. You know, let me say this. Chazal is not a comprehensive history. When Chazal quote a story, doesn't necessarily need to be the entire story. So this conversation between Rabbi Akiva and the convert might have taken more than 5 seconds. It might have taken 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a half hour. This is an excerpt, a snippet. And in my opinion, what Rabbi Akiva said, when Hillel HaZokan says, he specifically refers to Ben Adam L'Chaveroi. Maybe he gave him another posuk or another teaching regarding Ben Adam L'Makom. In no way do I see V'ahavta Kamocha as the basis of the entire Torah. It has nothing to do with Shabbos or Avodah Zarah or Yiras Elokim or so many other mitzvahs in the Torah. So in my understanding, Rabbi Akiva says this is the fundamental principle in the entire realm of Ben Adam L'Chaver.
Another question that was asked is, what is the reason behind the tzad, Minchas Chinuch, and Makav Aviv is Ben Adam L'Chaver?
No, the tzad of the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch is not Makav Aviv, it's Kabed Zavicha V'Simcha. The Minchas Chinuch understands that what defines Ben Adam L'Chaver, Ben Adam L'Makom is reasoning, rationale, not the practicality. So there's room to argue that the principle of Kabed Zavicha V'Simcha has to do with the Messiah, the transmission of Torah, or maybe somewhat it is related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In my opinion, what defines Ben Adam L'Chaver, Ben Adam L'Makom is it between people or is it between the person and HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That is why, in my understanding, both Kibbud Avim and Maka Aviv Imai are Ben Adam L'Chaver.
Could I ask if this mitzvah applies even to non-religious people? let's say a person who's a non-Shabbos observant Jew, we still have the mitzvah of Haftal L'Reacha Kamocha?
In Minchas Rosh Hashanah Shechuvas Chelek Aleph Siman Yud, I made my opinion very clear. I think the common secular Jew in our day and age is a Tinuk Shenishba. And therefore, yes, we should embrace them all and love them all and try to be helpful to them all. And do our best trying to bring them back to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So we have another 2 or 3 minutes. And I once again say, when I offered to answer some questions, the idea wasn't necessarily referring to today's shiur, but please, we could take one more question or maybe 2.
You mentioned in the shiur about like the changing medical science. People used to think leeches were healthy. I had a question kind of related to that, but especially I've been thinking about in psychology. It seems like what the experts think, some of it seems like every decade they change their minds. So I'm wondering, like, how do we deal with now the experts say this, but we're not sure that in the future the medical experts could be different?
Yes, unlike halacha, which is concrete, and what develops as interpretation and adaptation of halachic principles, science is a shifting landscape. And some ideas that were considered so clear and undebatable today are totally rejected. I think in the medical field, we know far more than we ever knew in the past, but we're still learning. It is in medicine and definitely in Teres HaNefesh, psychology. But by halacha, we trust mainstream medical knowledge. There's no other way to go about it. So we don't have the means to know what will we know in another decade or 2. And therefore, nitna l'shis l'roi v'lerapos, and we should rely on current mainstream medical knowledge. This discussion was thrust to the forefront of our communities during the COVID pandemic. And it was really a challenge. I don't want to go back to those days and to those discussions, but it was quite disturbing when so many prominent members of our communities came out against medical opinions. And even during this pandemic, medical opinions changed and evolved. And we all remember, the first few weeks of the outbreak of Corona, we wore gloves and, things have changed even in a short while. But by a halachic perspective, you trust mainstream medical knowledge of your day and age. There's no other way to go about it. So yes, things change, and halacha also changes its attitude according to changing opinions regarding science, technology, medicine, or psychology. But fundamentally, we find in the Gemara Nida Daf Chav Beis, Chachomim shalu as Abba, but Abba shor leroifim. So the Tanoim, the Amiruim, sometimes turn to doctors to help them share with their medical knowledge. And they relied on medical knowledge that was available in their day and age and in every era. One more.
Can we send a Shiloh to the Rav?
What?
People asking.
Can we send a Shiloh to the Rav by mail or email?
Oh, I hope you understand me. You could send a Shiloh, but I cannot promise to answer because I get 30 Shilohs every day. And I'm not such a Gaon. I can't write 30 tshuvas every day. I could try. You could send a shaila, but don't be offended if I won't respond. I will try. Okay, I do write many tshuvas, but I cannot answer. You know, Rav Chaim Kanievsky passed away 2 months ago. So for many years, he answered every letter, but his tshuvas were can, no, yes, no, maybe, perhaps. It's not my style, so I cannot possibly answer every shaila that I get. But please, you know, if you send a shaila by email, write participant in the Rabbi Price Shiur. I will give it priority, but I still can't promise to respond.
There's another question that was asked is how do we replenish our gas tanks when we are giving and don't get back a thank you?
Once again?
How do we replenish our gas tanks, our own emotions, when we are giving and don't get back a thank you?
Well, I understand the question is b'derech moshel. When I became a Rav, I really took upon myself to believe and to feel, deep down in my heart to feel what a schus and a privilege it is to serve. And I expect nothing in exchange. Let me share with you something very, personal. Many Rabbanim become frustrated because they feel I'm serving my community and people do not reciprocate. Every day people share their tzalas with me. Very few come back to say, Baruch Hashem, your bracha was fulfilled. Everything is beautiful, everything is nice. Sometimes you spend hours and days helping a person and he doesn't even care to be good shlech manasam. You married off a child, didn't even come to say Mazel Tov. And by human nature, you get hurt. But if you believe it's the greatest schus to help people, you should thank them for turning to you and giving you the opportunity to bring a smile on their faces, as I said before. You should be thankful that people are turning to you. So the more you give and give and give, it's like a well. So we find that expression in Chazal. When you give, it is self-replenishing. The privilege to share, the privilege to give, and not expect to get anything in return. That should recharge your batteries and keep you going. It was a privilege to be with you and to share Divrei Torah. And thank you for the Rabbi Price Foundation for giving me this opportunity again. And I thank you for publishing the new volume of Mission of Avraham and the Smag, which I received when I was recently in America. Keep up your great work, and we should share Divrei Torah, and we should only share the service. All the best to all of you.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Kol Tov.